Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses as we continue with Part 5, The Charities of Freemasonry, from Book the First, The Theory of the Mystic Tie by Albert G. Mackey. Part 5, The Charities of Freemasonry. There is no institution whose laws more strongly enforce, whose precepts more earnestly inculcate the virtue of charity, than that of Masonry. It is among the first lessons we are taught when we pass the threshold of the mystic temple, Tannehill. Besides the ordinary relief, which is afforded whenever it is asked for, to distressed Masons, their widows, and orphans, wheresoever dispersed over the face of the globe, other more permanent means for the diffusion of benevolence have been at various times organized by the Masonic bodies of different countries. If the enemies of Masonry could succeed in accomplishing what one of the most distinguished among them, Governor Lincoln of Massachusetts, acknowledged to be his sincere desire, the dissolution and extinction of the institution, they would become the criminal means of drying many a rich fountain of charity, whose waters have been the invigorating source of comfort and support to the poor, the widow, and the orphan. Author's note: even Stone, with all his virulent prejudices against the order, speaks of its charities as having sent forth their beneficence in countless streams and rivulets, carrying gladness and comfort to thousands of the destitute and afflicted. Letters on Masonry and Anti-Masonry, Let 15, page 160. It is with a feeling allied to bitterness that one is compelled to look upon these vicious, or at best, thoughtless persons who would rashly kill the seed of that tree, productive of so much good to the friendless and forlorn, who would hurl to its foundations that noble structure, which, for ages has been given a shelter and a welcome to the distressed, and extinguish that bright light, whose sun-like beams have penetrated and warmed hearts long chilled by penury. And yet all this they would do, while they offered no substitute for the institution, whose destruction would be most severely felt by those to whom the pitiless peltings of the world have given so much need of every resource and help. In the darkness and desolation of their poverty, there is an unpardonable inhumanity in this unrelenting persecution of Freemasonry, a persecution which claims for its defense or its motive not even the blindness of sectarian bigotry, nor the excitement of ambition, nor the inducements of interest, but which is born of and supported by the illiberality of ignorance and prejudice alone. It is not surprising that every attempt at the organization of a persecution so unworthy and so debased in its motive principle has utterly failed, for the common sense and universal instinct of man will ever revolt at the attack upon virtue, simply and unblushingly, because it is virtue that is to be attacked. Aristides was ostracized by the Athenians only because he was a just man, but the general consent of posterity has condemned the ostracism, or viewed it really as the highest encomium on the Grecian magistrate. Author's note: thus in the Great National, as it was absurdly called, Anti-Masonic Convention, which met in Philadelphia in 1830, a resolution having been offered for the relief of Miserus Morgan, the arch-impostor, it was immediately voted down, one member pronouncing the resolution quixotic, and another admitting that the abduction and murder of Morgan was a providential circumstance in the favor of anti-Masonry, but declaring that the convention had nothing to do with his family. Proceedings of the Convention, page 86. An English writer has made the following catalog of the objects of charity among Masons: merit and virtue in distress, persons who are incapable of extricating themselves from misfortune in their journey through life, industrious men who, from inevitable accidents and acts of providence, have fallen into ruin, widows left survivors of their husbands, by whose labors they were subsisted, orphans in tender years left naked to the world, and the aged whose arms are embraced by time, and thereby rendered unable to procure for themselves that sustenance they could accomplish in their youthful days. The catalogue is a melancholy one, but it is the object of Freemasonry, vituperated as it is, to relieve the wretched objects who compose it. Has that object been accomplished? Let the history of the order and the statistics of its benevolent establishments, founded and supported by the craft in every country where Masonry exists, answer the question. It would be far beyond the limits that this volume permits to give only a brief synopsis of all the charitable institutions that have, even within a few years, been established by the fraternity in various parts of the world, but a record of the names and objects of a few of the most prominent will serve to prove that Masonry is eminently a charitable institution, not simply in her solemn precepts and her daily teachings, but in her active, practical, and will-bestowing labors. Author's note: as early as the year 1440, we learn from the Charter of Cologne, if that document is to be considered authentic, that the Freemasons of Flanders erected and endowed hospitals for the relief of the poor who were attacked with St. Anthony's fire. The Grand Lodge of England, at an early period, adopted measures for supplying the wants of destitute brethren. In the year 1724, during the Grand Mastership of the Duke of Richmond, the Earl of Delakeith proposed that in order to promote the charitable disposition of Freemasons and to render it more extensively beneficial to the society, each lodge should make a certain collection, according to its ability, to be put into a joint stock and lodged in the hands of the treasurer at every quarterly communication for the relief of distressed brethren that should be recommended by the contributing lodges to the grand officers from time to time. From this beginning aroused the Committee of Charity of the Grand Lodge of England, which has since done so much for the relief of indigent and distressed Masons. Among the numerous instances of its benevolence may be mentioned a donation of £50 to the widow of the celebrated traveler, Belzoni. On one occasion, a brother White, a cutler of London, having lost his whole property by fire, the committee advanced to him £1,000 by way of loan, and when, on the retrieval of his affairs, the faithful debtor was ready to discharge the debt, the committee refused to accept it, but bestowed it as a marriage dowry upon his daughter. The Freemasons of London established, in 1835, a noble institution, known as the Asylum for Worthy, Aged, and Decayed Freemasons, the generous objects of which are significantly designated in its title. To this is now to be added an asylum for the widows of indigent Masons, which has been also established by the Grand Lodge of England. There is also in London a Royal Masonic Benevolent Institution, which was established in 1842, and the object of which is to grant annuities and to provide an asylum for aged and decayed Masons. Similar in spirit to this is another charity for the purpose of granting pensions to the widows of Masons, which has been but lately commenced, but which is in a very prosperous condition. In France, there is a Central House of Relief, which was established by the Grand Orient on the 21st of March, 1840. The object of this institution is to receive destitute Masons for a determined time to contribute to their immediate relief and to obtain employment for them. In 2 years, 11,600 francs were subscribed by the lodges and individuals to this benevolent design. The Society for the Patronage of Poor Children at Lyons is deserving of a more particular notice. The great design of this society is, by the proper education of the poor, to diminish the primary cause of pauperism. For this purpose, the society selects a child while in the cradle, and chooses, from among its members, a worthy and capable patron for it. This patron assists the parents in all their cares, supplies their insufficiency, their carelessness or indifference, watches over the health, the morals, and the education of the child, sees that it is well fed and well clothed in its infancy, and that it is sent to school at a proper age, examines its progress, encourages its efforts, instills into it the principles of religion, a fondness for labor, respect for its parents, and the love of country. He directs it in the choice of a trade, and selects a fitting master, and finally, if a boy, he supplies him, on the expiration of his apprenticeship, with the necessary tools to enter upon his career of industry, and if a girl, presents her with a dowry to facilitate her prospects of honorable marriage. In 1846, the Lodge of Perfect Sincerity at Marseilles, in France, adopted a resolution that, on the days on which the lodge meet, bread should be distributed to all the poor in the town, thus beautifully mingling the labors and the love of Masonry. Of a similar character was the useful, yet prudent charity of Apollo Lodge in the city of Troy, New York, which, seeing the distress occasioned in cold weather by the exorbitant price of wood, purchased in the summer of 1828 100 cords of wood at a cheap rate, which they laid up and sold to the meritorious poor at cost price. During the rigorous season of winter, many a starving and shivering children of penury has had occasion to bless the benevolence of the lodges of Marseilles and Troy. In 1845, the lodge Isis in Switzerland, assisted by the bequest of a worthy deceased brother, established a splendid fund for the relief of widows of Freemasons. At the same time, in Merseburg, a similar fund for supporting distressed widows and orphans was constituted. In Nice, a fund was established with a similar direction. At Wismar, 2 charities have been funded by the Masonic Lodge, one a weekly stipend for the orphans of members, and the other a fund for making loans to industrious but needy Masons. At Berlin, in Persia, there is an institution for the support of the children and widows of Freemasons, which is endowed by the annual subscribers of all the Persian lodges. There is an orphan asylum at Prague, a lying hospital in Socialwig, and an institution for widows at Rostock, and other charitable institutions, the result of Masonic benevolence at Pressburg, Stellen, Rosenberg, and various other cities of Germany. The Lodges of Holland founded, in 1808, an institution for the blind at Amsterdam, as an instance of the unwearying benevolence of the Holland Lodges. Clavel states that, in the course of 50 years, they had distributed among the distressed 900,000 francs, or about $180,000, which is at the rate of $3,600 a year. In Stockholm, there is an orphan asylum, which was founded in 1753 by the contributors of the Swedish lodges. This institution is, as I have already said, very rich, having been endowed in 1767 by Brother Broham with the sum of 130,000 francs, and in 1778 with an annual rent of 26,000 francs by the Queen of Sweden. In the United States, the Masonic Order is not yet wealthy enough to have organized many institutions for benevolent purposes. Yet the active charities of the fraternity have not been less, in proportion to the amount of means, than those of their richer European brethren. Among the Masonic charities of this country, none is more worthy of notice than the Masonic Board of Relief in the city of New Orleans, which has lately been incorporated by the Grand Lodge of Louisiana under the name of Louisiana Relief Lodge No. 1. Some idea of the extent of its charity may be obtained from the statement that in the course of about 18 months it had distributed $4,587 to relieve the distressed and to bury the dead, 200 applicants having been relieved. In February 1855, it had 8 widows under its charge, who received a monthly stipend sufficient to relieve their necessities. Stephen Garrard, the millionaire, who was himself a Mason, bequeathed the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania the sum of $20,000, which, by his direction, has been allowed to increase to $30,000, and the income of which is annually distributed among worthy poor Masons. In New York, a fund has been commenced for the purpose of establishing a Freemasons' orphan asylum. In 1843, the Lodge of Strict Observance was constituted in New York, and one of its first acts was to take under its care 2 little orphan boys, the children of a brother Mason. These little boys, having been regarded as the children of the lodge, and their welfare is a subject of satisfaction to every brother. In the distant isles of the ocean, the spirit of Masonic charity is warming the hearts of the brethren to deeds of active benevolence. The lodges of Tasmania and Sydney in Australia have established a fund for the relief of distressed Masons, their widows, and orphans, which, it is said, though as yet small, is effecting much good. In short, go where we may, we shall find the traces of Masonic charity not published in printed records, nor blazoned to the world for the purposes of vainglorious boasting, but acting in secret, unknown to all save the recipients of our bounty, and drying the tear of the widow, and hushing the cry of the orphan, giving aid to the helpless, and consolation to the sorrowful, with a privacy that adds to the beauty of this chief of virtues. The corollary of all of this is furnished by Preston. From this view of the advantages which result from the practice and profession of Masonry, every candid and impartial mind must acknowledge its utility and importance to the state, and surely if the picture here drawn be just, it must be no trifling acquisition to any government to have under its jurisdiction a society of men who are not only true patriots and loyal subjects, but the patrons of science and the friends of mankind. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.